Hello, this is Jamie Franklin, curator at the Bennington Museum. Welcome to this week's session of Chats with Jamie. This week, I am very pleased to be able to be speaking with artist Leslie Parke. Leslie is an artist that I've known for probably the entirety of my 15 years here in the area, and I've gotten to know her and her work over the course of that time. Today, I'd just like to introduce her to you and talk a little bit about her work and its evolution over the course of the last 15 years or so. So welcome, Leslie.
Hey, Jamie.
Hey, how are you?
Great. It's
Good to see you.
Doing this.
Well, it's a fun opportunity, you know, though this whole pandemic has been kind of difficult in many ways for many people. I think one of the kind of advantages of it is that it's pushed, you know, museums and institutions to kind of get creative and think outside the box. And this is a great way, I think, to kind of introduce people to artists in our area. So, and you're one of those artists that I've already said, have gotten to know fairly well, and you've become a friend. And so I thought it would be a great opportunity to just kind of have a chat and talk, get people to know a little bit more about you. So why don't we just start by you kind of telling us, you know, your background as an artist, how you came to be an artist, and particularly how you came to be here in Bennington.
Well, I knew very early that this is what I wanted to do. And so as a child, I started taking classes in New York at the Museum of Modern Art and at the Metropolitan. And so I knew right from the get-go. But what brought me to Bennington was actually a painting by Jules Zalitsky that I saw at the Museum of Modern Art called Cleopatra Flesh. And that painting knocked my socks off. I was 10 years old when I first saw it. I wrote a paper about it. When I was 15, I met another student at my school, whose cousin had married Ken Noland. And when she told me her father played poker with Ken Noland and Jules Zalitsky, I'm like, where is that and how can I get there? And so from that point on, I had already decided that Bennington at some point was on my bucket list. And I did a little detour to California. I did a year of college out there, and then I came back and went to Bennington. And it was really all these mid-century artists that you're showing at the museum that brought me to Bennington, which is kind of odd because I think people think of them as New Yorkers, but you know, they worked up here, and so that's why I wanted to be up here.
And so that's great, and I think it's fascinating. Why don't we actually bring up one of the first images that we have to kind of take a look at and talk about. This is a painting of yours from, I think, 2007, which is, I think, around the time that you had your first solo show in our regional arts program at the Bennington Museum. I'm not sure if this exact painting was in that exhibition, but you know, I knew that you had this kind of interest and reverence towards some of the artists like Jules Zalitsky and Ken Noland, and yet I first became familiar with your work when you were doing kind of photorealist stuff and these incredibly beautiful paintings of iridescent bugs and butterflies. Can you talk a little bit about kind of your interest in kind of that line and that liminal space between representation and abstraction, and kind of how it's played out over the course of your career?
Well, it's very strange because for me, I was really just trying to find something that reflected light. I was always chasing the light. It was like after I did this residency in Giverny at Claude Monet's place, that's when I started painting representationally. But mostly I just wanted to paint things that emanated light. I loved a painting where the light feels like it's coming from the inside of the painting out of the viewer. And so all of my choices were to find things that would do that. And for many of the years that I painted representationally, I felt like I was in a fog because I didn't know what I was looking for ultimately. I didn't know why I kept coming back. You know, here I have this background with these mid-century modernist artists, and yet I'm painting representationally. So for me, that was a split and a problem, quite frankly. So, but I did feel compelled to look for these subjects that conveyed a quality of light, and that's something that's remained consistent. And when I morphed back into more abstract work, it was that quality of light that I continued to go after.
I think that's the kind of a perfect segue actually to our next image. You just mentioned that you had a residency in Giverny at Claude Monet's studio there. And though I think this is a slightly later almond blossom painting, I believe it was during that time that you were in France that you first started seeing painting these almond blossom and blossom paintings. So, and this is a kind of a point in your work where I think that kind of push and pull between representation and abstraction becomes most apparent, and why one of the reasons why I really love it and what I love about your work in general. So you maybe talk about that in relationship to this painting.
Well, I had another residency in France, and that's where I saw the almond trees, because they're in the south of France.
Yep.
But I came back from that residency and I did a very meticulous representational painting of this almond tree, but I cropped it the way a modernist would, so it was like Pollock walking through the woods. And then I kept working with that imagery, and I kept deconstructing it. I made lithographs with it, and I divided into the different layers of the lithograph, because it was like a 4-color thing. And then I made these different color versions within the lithograph. Then I took the lithograph and I started making paintings from that. And then from the new paintings, I started making digital images. From the digital images, I came back and made paintings again. So it was very involved thinking and process and everything. But eventually, from that very meticulous representational image, through all these processes, it morphed out into this splatter and splash kind of painting. And of course, you're always concerned, it's like Pollock owns the drip, but, I said, move over, I need it. So then I started working that way. And that has then ended up influencing all the work I've done since then. But the thing that came in here that was very much out of the Giverny experience was, because when I did the prints, I did it for different times of day, which is totally a Monet thing to do. And then when I started changing out the colors, finally what I ended up doing was adding metallic paint to my work. And it was because with Monet, he painted different moments in the day, different times of the year, different minutes within an hour. And what I did was I put the light into the painting by using the silver paint, so it reflected the light, and the painting itself changes during the day and during the season. So when I hang it in what I call my gallery space at the studio, it has a west-facing light, and I'd come out at the end of the day and the painting would be screaming with light bouncing off of it. And whereas, most artists go to great lengths to have their work lit properly, with mine, you could put a disco ball in front of it, because the way the light is going to actually interact with the paint, that is what's interesting to me. I mean, basically, I'm a glitter girl. What can I say?
Well, why don't we take a look at the next image? The first image we saw was your first solo exhibition at the museum, at least since I was there. And this is from your last solo exhibition at the museum. And this is actually a photograph. You maybe tell us a little bit about your photographs and about their relationship to your painting. But what I think is most interesting, and maybe you can kind of expand on this, is the idea of, a lot of the through line between all of your work, whether it be abstract, photorealistic, or in this case, photographs of the real world that look abstract. It's this idea of perception and how we see the world. And I'd love to just kind of hear you kind of expand on those ideas.
Well, with this one in particular, this was a photograph taken in France. On the computer, it doesn't look as crisp as the print itself looks. But the whole dark side on the left is actually the effect of the light on this wall, because in the south of France, the light is so harsh. So that gray white on the right runs into that black area, but the light is totally canceling it out. So it's interesting that the composition is actually created by light, for one thing. And then also in this, which is not evident on the computer screen, is that it has tiny flecks of green paint in the lower part of this image. And it's something that I just love about this particular photo is the surface, the accidental painting that's going on, and how it illuminates the rest of the work here. But for me, I fell into the photography because I always use photographs for my paintings. And so when I was in Giverny, I took 1 million slides of the pond, and when I came back, I just kept going on with that to find my subject matter, and I worked from the photographs. And at one point, actually, it was your former director, Robert Waltersdorf, who came over and said, "Why aren't you printing these photographs?" And I said, "Because I'm a painter." And he says, "No, really, why aren't you printing these?" So with that push, I did decide to start printing them. And but the subjects I ended up going after became more and more abstract. So they started out helping me with the representation, and in the end, they helped me search for an abstract imagery. And the first ones that happened were those wrapped cargo pieces that I was taking pictures of at the Tractor Supply. Mm-hmm. And then it moved on to finding it in other things. So,
that's just this kind of, again, that push and pull, from taking kind of a hyper realistic image of bugs or metallic beetles or butterflies. Ultimately, as an artist, you're still having to take that and create it from the abstract elements of art, color and light and form, and then taking hyper realistic photographs of the real world, but making them, it helps us. I think your work helps viewers understand how we see and how we perceive the world, which is what I love so much about it. And now, before we kind of close up this conversation, I'd love to just kind of hear what you've been up to in the studio. And I know we have our last image, which is of one of your most recent works. Your work is so diverse, and I think so often, you're a professional artist. You make your living, selling your work. A lot of times artists who do that, they find a subject matter, they find a style, and they stick with it because it's what sells. But I've always really admired your bravery for being willing to experiment so much. So can you just tell us a little bit about what you've been up to in your studio and about this painting, which I know is a response to the pandemic?
Yes, well, basically when we went into lockdown, my life didn't really change. I live alone, I work alone, I was able to go to the studio. But as we have all experienced, our head goes into a whole different space. And, I found days I was crying, and, there's the depression and there's the worry and all of that stuff. This particular painting came out of, I was working on a painting from weeks before COVID. And then I kept working on it and nothing was working. Weeks and weeks and weeks working on a painting. And I was in the studio and I just got this sensation, put your handprint on this painting. And I listened to that and I just stuck my hand in the paint and I slapped it onto the canvas. This is over a very fine painting of a river I had been working on. And I just started pounding it on there, and then I went home. And then I thought, I know what that painting needs. We had just seen the mass burial of all the people in New York in Potter's Field. I was horrified by this image, and I came back in the studio and I added the skulls. And I think in our isolation, we have a lot of fear, but we can also lose sight. When you hear these numbers, it's like, what does it mean that 900 people died today? There's a big disconnect. And I wanted to record that moment.
Well, that's Wonderful. It has been a difficult moment, and in our world and in our country and here. But it's great that I think one of the reasons I wanted to be able to do this series is that I think artists have a wonderful way of thinking about and responding to the world around us. And this is a powerful painting, and it expresses those fears and anxieties. So thank you for sharing it with us. Thank you for spending some time to share your work over time and what you've been working on in the studio. And hopefully, sooner than later, we'll be able to see each other in person again soon. So thank you, Leslie.
Well, thank you, Jamie. You guys are doing a great job.
Thank you very much.